All right, so it was a wild week for the Oklahoma City Thunder coming out of the All-Star break where they might have caused some fans to, I'm not going to say panic, but they've caused some fans to now have concern on if the Thunder are as legitimate as we have talked them up to be, not only towards the end of last season, but all towards the first half of this season, where the Oklahoma City Thunder going into the All-Star break were in an 8-game lead for number one in the West. They had the NBA's number one defense. They had the NBA scoring leader. You had two All-Stars. You had an MVP frontrunner. And when you looked at the Thunder defense, they were only letting 104.5 points per game, 43% field goal shooting, 33% from the field. They had 18.3 turnovers per game. It felt like Oklahoma City was on pace to be one of the greatest regular season teams that we've seen. And you come out of the All-Star break and you lose that first game to Minnesota, and you lose it in a way where you have a 25-point lead, and you hear Chris Finch in interviews talk about how he almost didn't put in his stars again. He almost didn't put in his leading scorers in that game, Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards, to try to make a comeback, right? They were ready to throw in the white flag. And you saw in that fourth quarter, and you heard J-Dub talk about it after the game, they just were kind of thought the game was over. The Oklahoma City Thunder stopped playing there. And by the time that they really felt like Minnesota was a threat and that the game was starting to get uncomfortable, it became hard for Oklahoma City to kind of regain dominance, right? Regain that momentum that you had in the first three quarters. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, what do you mean they shut Shea down? Because Shea in that game scored 39 points. But if you look at Shea's performance in the fourth quarter and overtime, 100%, the Minnesota Timberwolves were able to slow down Shea. They were able to stop him. And we have seen at times where the Minnesota Timberwolves have been successful with that. So they go out there and hand Oklahoma City their lone loss for this week, where Oklahoma City ultimately is 4-1, and you thought they would be 5-0, and everybody was hoping Oklahoma City was going to go 28-0 through the rest of the stretch, because now you've got Chet back, you've got Hart, you can play the double big lineups. Shea is the front runner. Maybe J-Dub, now that he's moving to the small forward position, can really fit into his own. But you come out and you're a little lackadaisical, and that's okay. That's okay. These are the games that it's okay to have in the regular season to find out a little bit more about yourself. And I definitely think this game led more into Mark trying to let the lineups test themselves and try to find new things, try to figure out some holes and figure out how you're going to fix those. Hence, I think the biggest hole off season that we've seen is when Shea comes off the court, who's going to touch the basketball? Who's going to score the basketball? How does this offense flow? And although Aaron Wiggins has been a phenomenal scorer this year, J-Dub is a guy that I think a lot of people want to be able to go out there and rely on. You really just felt like didn't have that option when Shea was on the bench. And one of the other things that you found out in the four other games outside of Minnesota this week, when you look at the Brooklyn Nets, you look at the Atlanta Hawks, you look at the San Antonio Spurs games, one of the things that Oklahoma City's really been able to find is being able to see Chet go out there and be a guy that can get those buckets for you and be that second additional scorer when Shea goes to the bench. Be a guy that can be a focal point of that offense. Against the San Antonio Spurs, you saw Jalen Williams go out there and kind of just demand that the San Antonio Spurs have to respect him heavily on the defensive side of the ball. He goes out there and drops a career high of 41 points. And where, although maybe J-Dub's not going to do that in the playoffs, I think you're going to find that J-Dub's going to start fitting a lot more into this offense, maybe where a lot of people have kind of been down on his offensive production because maybe he's had to pour out a little bit more on defense because he's had to play the power forward, or at times when Oklahoma didn't have a center, you saw them playing J-Dub at the center position, right? So he's having to guard those big men, and he's having to guard the other stars on the team at the forward position. But now that he's moving back to the small forward position, obviously you still have Lou Dort, who's been a phenomenal defender. You've got Kason Wallace, who you've been able to bring in, who's been a phenomenal defender. Alex Caruso. Maybe those minutes can come off on J-Dub a little bit and allow him to be a little bit more focused on the offensive side of the ball. And now that he's playing at the small forward position, which has been a position that he's a little bit more natural at, maybe you start to see more performances like what you saw against the San Antonio Spurs, where J-Dub can be Oklahoma's leading scorer. And when Shea goes to the bench, he can be a guy that Oklahoma City can lean on. And I think that's one thing that you really thought Mark maybe was trying to do this week. You maybe thought, is he trying to find that other guy that can step in and be the piece for Oklahoma City that can score the basketball when I put Shea on the bench? Because Shea has to go to the bench. He's going to have to get the rest. And quite honestly, if you can pull him out for longer stretches so that he can just be more well-rested, even in the playoffs, I think that's ideal. You want a Chet or a J-Dub to be able to take that next step, or even an Aaron Wiggins, who I think sometimes didn't get the respect that he deserved, especially from me, where I talked about maybe potentially trading Aaron Wiggins, and then it felt like Aaron Wiggins heard that and then decided to just go off on this absolute tear. I think it was that week where he scored 41 points is where I made that statement. But you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder improving to 4-1 on the week. You split the series with Minnesota, right? You get the one at Minnesota. You lose at home in overtime. You go to Brooklyn, and really that one came to just be a numbers thing, right? Was Brooklyn going to continue to be on the hot streak and hit more three-pointers to be able to go out there and close the point gap? And I think a lot of people now are probably looking at this week and maybe being a little concerned about the Thunder's defense, but I don't think after what you saw this week, you need to be too concerned about where the Thunder are on defense, because I think coming out of the All-Star break, again, like what you saw against the Minnesota Timberwolves that night that the Oklahoma City Thunder blew the 25-point lead, I think the Thunder right now are just in cruise control. They know they have the West pretty well locked up at this point. And at this point, it's just, I'm not going to say it's boring to them, but I feel like they're just ready to get to the playoffs, right? They know they're the best team in the West. They know they're one of the, if not the best team in the league. And I just feel like there's this thing of when they want to turn it on, Oklahoma City can turn it on. And you saw that against Brooklyn. You saw that in the second half against San Antonio. And then you look at the Atlanta Hawks, right? They go on the road. You beat the Atlanta Hawks 135-119. And Oklahoma City on the road completes the 3-game sweep of all 3 of those teams. And now they're going to come home for, they're going to play 1, 2, 3, 4 out of their 5 games at home. You get a couple of national televised games on there. So you really get a chance to, I guess, re-show the league and re-show NBA fans out there that the Thunder are legit. The Thunder are what everybody thinks they are. They are a team that can go out there and win the NBA Finals. Now, I think a lot of this is going to be dependent on playoff matchup, because if you're an Oklahoma City fan, I think there are teams that you do not want to see in the playoffs. You still might win those series, but I think there's teams that you would rather not see. But the Oklahoma City Thunder, you look at this and you look at a 4-1 weekend, and I think where some people are disappointed with that, most teams would be ecstatic being 4-1 on the weekend, right? Because, not a lot of teams can go out there and do that week in and week out. And the Thunder have been able to put together stretches where they win and win and win. And so, yeah, I look at this week, and although the defense hasn't been as impressive, I think it was a successful week. I think you found out a lot about this team. And I think the Thunder are going to continue to maybe work on some of those lineup holes that they've been having. And then you've been able to see a lot more Chet. Now, Chet did roll his ankle in that, I think it was the Atlanta game. So he did not play for the San Antonio Spurs. I would imagine he'll be back for the game against Houston at home, or at least at Memphis. But you did see him on the court. It seemed like he was able to get around. I think just precautionary measures. You keep him out for that San Antonio game, especially since Victor Wembanyama isn't out there, and you bring him back for the homestand. And so I think Chet has been able to provide a piece to the offensive and the defensive side of the ball that we didn't see all season. And I think you're still trying to figure out how to play the double big lineup. And I think at times it doesn't look pretty, but Chet has been able to provide an interior presence where maybe, yeah, he can't play bully ball, but being able to just block the shots in the way that he has. I mean, I can't remember the amount of block shots he's had since he's came back, but it's kind of absurd of how many blocks he's had compared to the amount of games that he's played in since he came back. And then you look at the offensive side of the ball with Chet's ability to go out there and be able to stretch the floor as a center. It's absolutely elite. And something that when you get into the playoffs, it's going to be hard for, I think, a lot of teams to be able to go in there and account for that. So again, I think it was a very successful week. Yeah, would you have liked to see Oklahoma go 5-0? Yeah. But it just wasn't in the cards. 4-1, plenty good enough. And I think a game like that against Minnesota, Oklahoma City really needed. And I know that sounds absolutely crazy, but I think Oklahoma City needed a game like that to kind of wake up, smell the roses, and remember that on any given night, any team can beat you regardless of what kind of lead you have. Because in the playoffs, those kind of mistakes, losing a game like that because maybe you're up 25 points and you think the game is over and you're about to come out of the game, those cost you series. And so you would much rather have that loss now in the regular season, learn from it, adjust to it, than find out that pain in the playoffs and have it potentially cost you a series. So if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys hit that like, hit the subscribe button. If you guys haven't joined the discussion, let me know what you guys' thoughts on the Oklahoma City Thunder's, what I'm going to call a successful weekend. But hit that like, hit the subscribe button. We'll see y'all next time.